Single dad, sheltered widow, and her twin girls, shunned by her family, not knowing they'd heal his heart. It was the coldest winter Maple Hollow had seen in years, and yet the frost wasn't what made Daniel feel numb, it was the silence in his home, deafening since his wife passed 2 years ago. Once alive with bedtime stories and laughter, now the halls echoed with the footsteps of a grieving father and his 7-year-old son, Noah, who hadn't spoken more than a few words since the funeral. Daniel, a former high school football coach turned full-time mechanic, had hardened himself to the world, not out of bitterness, but survival. Until the morning he found her. She was standing on the edge of the park trail, soaked from the freezing rain, clutching the hands of 2 identical little girls, no older than 4. Her coat was too thin, her eyes too tired, and her face held the kind of sorrow that made Daniel's chest tighten. He wouldn't have stopped, he never did anymore. But something about the way one of the girls looked up at him, hopeful despite the cold, pulled him from the driver's seat of his rusted pickup. "You all right?" he asked, careful not to sound too concerned. The woman nodded quickly, too quickly. "Yes. We're just on our way." But her lips trembled, and her shoes were soaked through. Daniel paused. "You got somewhere to be?" She hesitated. "Not really. Not anymore." It was then he noticed a suitcase, half buried in snow behind her. He took a breath. He didn't do this, he didn't invite strangers into his life. But something about this woman reminded him of the loneliness he tried to ignore. "I'm not a creep, just a dad. Look, my kid and I live a mile down. We got heat. And food. You and the girls can warm up." She stared at him, unsure. But the children were shivering. Finally, she nodded. Her name was Emma. Her husband had died in a car crash last spring, 6 months after their twins, Ava and Lily, were born. Her family, strict and judgmental, believed she'd married beneath her status and, worse, that her grief was self-inflicted. When the money ran out, so did their support. She'd been staying in a shelter, but it closed suddenly. They had nowhere else to go. Daniel didn't mean to let them stay more than a night. But then Noah came out of his room the next morning and, for the first time in weeks, watched a cartoon with the girls. Then he shared his toast with Ava. Then Lily made him giggle. By day 3, Emma cooked breakfast. By day 5, she folded laundry like it was her home. Daniel noticed how the house changed, how the couch became a story circle, how the kitchen smelled of cinnamon and warmth, how the silence was no longer crushing but filled with small voices, singing lullabies. Still, Daniel kept his heart guarded. He told himself it was temporary. But it wasn't just the kids, Emma herself stirred something he'd long buried. She was soft-spoken, but strong. Fragile, yet composed. She cried quietly at night when she thought no one heard, and she laughed like someone who hadn't in years. He admired her courage, her devotion to her daughters. And when she smiled at Noah, Daniel felt the pull of something terrifying, hope. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Daniel was in the garage when Emma burst in, tears streaming down her face. "They want to take them," she choked. He dropped the wrench. "What? Who?" "My parents. They found out where I was. They say I'm unfit, that I dragged them into poverty. They're trying to get custody." His hands clenched. "They can't just take them. They have money. Lawyers. I have nothing." That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, fists curled in the blankets, heart pounding with fury and fear. He had lost too much already. He couldn't watch someone else lose everything, too. Not when those little girls had finally brought light back into his son's eyes, not when Emma had reminded him that healing was possible. So he did what he hadn't done in a long time, he fought. Daniel hired a lawyer, using the last of his savings. He got character witnesses, neighbors, friends, even Noah's school counselor, who testified to Emma's love and dedication. The court case wasn't easy, but Daniel was there every step of the way, holding her hand, watching as Emma slowly stood taller, spoke louder, learned to fight for herself. The judge's decision came on a rainy Thursday morning. Daniel sat between Emma and Noah, whose hand now fit perfectly in his. The room was quiet as the judge declared, "This court finds no reason to remove custody from Ms. Emerson. The children remain with their mother." Emma gasped. The girls cheered. Daniel felt a weight lift from his chest he didn't realize he'd been carrying. Outside the courthouse, Emma turned to him, her eyes brimming. "You didn't have to do all that. I didn't expect." "I did," he said, gently brushing a damp curl from her cheek. "Because you and those girls saved us, too." The weeks that followed were filled with slow, beautiful change. Emma got a part-time job at the local diner. Daniel expanded his shop. The kids became inseparable, their laughter now the heartbeat of the home. And on a snowy Christmas morning, as the five of them gathered around the fire, unwrapping small but meaningful gifts, Daniel knelt beside Emma and whispered, "Stay. Not just today. For good." She nodded, tears catching the twinkle lights. What started as a chance encounter on a frozen road became something no one expected, a second chance at family. Daniel thought he was the one giving shelter. But in truth, Emma and her girls had rescued him just as much. They filled the void with compassion, joy, and the messy, miraculous magic of everyday love. In the quiet town of Maple Hollow, people talked about Daniel's story. How a single dad and a struggling widow found each other not through romance or rescue, but through shared pain, resilience, and the quiet courage to trust again. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy. But it was real. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Because sometimes, the people we're meant to find aren't the ones who sweep in with grand gestures, but the ones who show up with muddy boots, shared meals, and lullabies at dusk. And in the end, the heart doesn't heal through time alone, it heals through love. Unexpected. Unlikely. Undeniable.